describe him to me. And Muslims, look at the description of your Rasul. And for some, this would be the first time you hear what your Prophet looked like. I saw a man of striking appearance. ظاهر الوضاء أبلج الوجه, radiant face, حسن الخلق, beautifully created. لم تعبه الثجلة, his belly wasn't protruding. ولم تزر به السعلة, nor was his head disproportionate and small. وسيم قسيم, proportionate and delicate, finely made, a specimen of a creation. في عينيه دعج, in his eyes there was a contrast. The dark was immensely dark, the white was excessively white. وفي أشفاره وطف, and his eyelashes were long. وفي صوته صهل, and in his voice was a natural echo. وفي عنقه سطع, and his neck was elegantly long. وفي لحيته كثاثة, his beard was full and thick. أزج أقرن, his eyebrows were arched, but they were not joined. It was separated. In summit فعليه الوقار, when he was silent, dignity covered him. وإن تكلم سماه وعلاه البهاء, and when he spoke, it was audible and clear, almost commanding and overtaking. أجمل الناس وأبهاهم من بعيد, from afar the most striking and outstanding in appearance. وأحسنهم وأجملهم من قريب, and when he came near, the best of them and the most handsome of them in closeness. حلو المنطق, such an exalted and sweet level of logic. Like when he used to speak, it was so coherently logical, it was smooth and easy to understand. فصل لا نزر ولا هذر, he was to the point, not excessive nor too short. كأن منطقه خرزات نظم يتحدرن, his logic, his utterances, his words were like jewels coming out of a necklace, calculated, polished, one after the other, it would flow magically. ربعة, he was medium in height. Your eye didn't have to strain to look up at him, nor was it tedious to look down at him. He was a comfortable sight to look at. له رفقاء يحفون به, he had friends, the people that were with him, they were working around him to try to serve and protect him. إن قال سمعوا لقوله, when he used to say something, they used to hearken to what he used to say. وإن أمر تبادروا إلى أمره, when he commanded, they used to compete to fulfill the command. This is Muhammad Rasulullah. This is Muhammad Rasulullah. Anas ibn Malik says, he says, I came out one night, I came out one night, it was the full moon night. And I looked at the moon, and in the desert, understand, the moon is an awesome sight. It is smooth, it is radiant, it is clear, it is gentle compared to the scorching sun at which they are used to. So the moon was the epitome of beauty. So he says, I came out at a full moon night and I looked at the moon and I saw it, beautiful, handsome. So I said, let me go see if the moon is more handsome or my Prophet is more handsome. Let me see if that is more beautiful or the Prophet is more beautiful. So I went and I saw him standing afar. So I looked at his face and I looked at the moon, and I looked at his face, and I looked at the moon, and I looked at his face, and I looked at the moon, and he said, Wallahi, he was more handsome than the moon in its entirety. That is just the look of your Rasul. Aisha radiyallahu anha says, I was sewing with the needle, my needle dropped in the dark, I couldn't find it. I said, Ya Rasul, I can't find it. He moved his face close, and I swear, out of the radiance of his face, I found my needle. And the Prophet ﷺ was mind-bogglingly handsome, but his handsomeness was covered with waqar and jalal and hayba. The Sahaba say, when we used to sit at his feet, two feelings conflicting would come on the heart. The first one, you wanted to look at him. You wanted to behold the majesty of his face. And when you wanted to look up, shyness used to overtake you, so you used to look down. Amr ibn al-As says, I sat with him many times, but if you ask me to describe his face, I can't describe it. I wouldn't be able to look up to him ijlalan wa ta'zeeman. I couldn't look up at him. And that is why he didn't have the problems that Yusuf alayhi salam had. Because it was difficult to penetrate the awe and the splendor of the Rasul.
He was very awe-inspiring when you saw him. He was monumental, grand in nature. His face was like a moon on Laylat al-Badr that had a light coming out of it like the moon on Laylat al-Badr. He was taller than a moderate build, but not exceedingly tall. But he was of a middle stature inclining towards heights, because everything about him was middle. Everything, even his physical description, his color was a middle color. Lam yakun amhaq. He wasn't pasty white and he wasn't black. He was a color like what we call the harvest moon. And his hair was neither straight nor curly. It was wavy. It was middle. Everything about him was middle. He didn't speak slow and he didn't speak fast. He spoke in a moderate tone. His words were neither too short nor were they excessive, but they were always just right. When he spoke, people felt as if exactly the right amount of words were used. Everything about him was moderation. He had a full head, and his hair was wavy. If he parted it, then it parted. It never went past the lobes of his ears if he allowed it to go long, because sometimes he would cut it for ibadah, like the umrah or the hajj, when he shaved. But when he let it, it went to the lobes of his ears, and in some riwayah, just above the shoulder. He had a large forehead, which in physiognomy traditionally was an indication of high quality. And then his eyebrows, they were full, and there was a slight space between them. And then he had a vein on his forehead that if he got upset, they could see the vein. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The upper part of his nose was aquiline. So he had a beautiful nose that had like a bridging on the upper part. And his eyes were very dark. Sahl al-Khaddain. He had a high, beautiful cheek. He had a mouth that was full, so that when he spoke, his pronunciation was perfect. His teeth were beautiful. There was slight space in the teeth. He had a light hair on his chest. His neck was like a gazelle's neck. He had a beautiful neck and a high neck. It had like a beautiful, like a silvery clarity to it. He was balanced in all of his outward aspects. Badinan, he had a strong build, mutamasikan, and it was all perfectly formed. His stomach and his chest were equal. He never had a large stomach. He had no punch. Even when he was in his 60s, his stomach was always flat. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli alayhi. He was full-chested, and ba'ida ma bayn al-mankibayn, his shoulders were broad, and he had a large bone. Also his trachea, where it met there was space. And then he had a light hair also on his stomach. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Ariyat Thadjain, he had no hair over his breasts. He had hair on his arms and some on his shoulders and the upper part of his chest. And he had large, full hands and full palms, and his feet were arched, and he was sinewy and strong. Limbs were strong and he had full calves, but his feet were so smooth that water would pour off, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And then when he walked softly, quick-paced, as if he was walking on an incline. When he looked to somebody, he didn't just turn like this, he moved his entire body, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, to give full attention to that person. He looked more at the ground than he did up. His glance was generally down because of the power of his glance. And then most of his looking was mulahadha. When he looked at people, he didn't maintain his stare. He would look and then move away. So as he looked at people, he never fixed his focus on people because of the effect that that would have on the people. He was always grief-stricken. What that means is that if you looked at him, like if you saw him in the mosque, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, if you saw him in the mosque and you looked at him, you would think that he was grief-stricken because the istighraq, his presence with his Lord was so intense that his face would have a sense of being completely absorbed in thought. He smiled. He always looked at people and smiled and made them feel joyful. He never made people feel depressed.